Okay, my 30-second countdown did not come on, but my name is Bart Sharp, and this is Becoming Quantum Conscious. And we're on United Public Radio, and I don't know what flashed before my eyes there, but I guess that's the replacement for the countdown. Once again, this is Becoming Quantum Conscious, and I am Bart Sharp, and you're on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 107.7 and 105.3 out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana, and we are worldwide. We are on Roku, YouTube, Facebook, Spreaker, and other platforms, and literally it's connected all around the world. And so, no telling where everybody is, but we're really glad you're here today because we really have a great show today with somebody that, as I have read her book, which is The Madonna Secret. And it's really a fabulous book. It's a novel. And we have the author here today, Sophie Strand. And welcome to the show, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Bart. And thank you for just saying that sweet thing about my book. Thank you.
Oh, it's a really powerful book, everybody. It has such wonderful descriptions. And it's one of my favorite topics because Mary Magdalene, some legends and stories say that she went to France and went to this magical land where I do spiritual tours. And so all the mag heads, as we call them, all live in Southwest France and, study Magdalene and stuff. And something so unique about Sophie is that, well, she's a very skilled author, but you always get this intuitive sense that she feels things very deeply and brings that out into the story about Mary Magdalene. And I guess I just wanted to start. It's like, why is Mary Magdalene so important in this day and age, you think?
It's a good question. Well, I think it's less so that she is individually so important right now. And it's more that we're in an age where stories that were suppressed, that were maligned, that were erased and hidden, persecuted for so long are poking up from the ground again. That, the queer voices, female voices, voices that are non-white males are suddenly emerging, and literally emerging in, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the Gnostic Christian texts that predate the canon of the Gospels that are probably closer to the historical Jesus. So we're getting these alternative takes on stories we think we know well. And at a moment in time when we can really see that 2,000 years of Christianity, as mistranslated by the Roman Empire, as co-opted by empire, has not been good for the environment, for women, for people. It might be interesting to go back and replant it in its complex anthropological and ecological context and its entanglements. And I do think that the Magdalene, as a woman, as obviously being a key character whose voice has been repeatedly suppressed, might be an important person to ask for her story. And of course, we have lots of folklore. We have all of these texts that were suppressed that are coming back. We have a history of iconography, of heretical groups like the Cathars that I'm sure, as someone who's spent a lot of time in France, you know a lot about.
Yes.
But she's in no way been forgotten, but she's never been accepted by the dominant paradigm. So I think that she's an interesting person to ask for advice on how to compost Christianity, how to compost a narrative that does not seem well matched with its original characters.
Yeah, wow, what a great answer. And it's really interesting with Mary Magdalene as you talk about this age, because when you look at it astrologically, the last 2,000 years of I can't remember the last age, but it's the age of man-made law. And the Romans were experts at man-made law.
Right?
Of course,
Yeah.
if you didn't follow the man-made law, a man-made man would confront you on it very abruptly. Uh, However, this next era of Aquarius is all about nature-made law.
That's what
And
I'm for. Wait, isn't it Aquarius to Pisces? That's my friend who's an astrologer
Pisces.
was telling me.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's Pisces. It just keeps slipping my mind. But the important thing is we are in that new age and we have transferred over. Um, According to my guest next week is Peter Craig. We were talking about this. We pre-recorded the show that he went into the thing, and nobody exactly knows when it's going to transfer, but his theory was it transferred officially, energetically, and astrologically about 3 months ago.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah. He's a really
Huh.
cool guy.
I'm gonna have to listen.
Yeah. He's good. And so we have this woman that you written about, and it's really great with your book because it's your own story, and it's a lot of the components with Mary Magdalene, but it's a fictional story. It is something that our imagination can follow and apply to our own lives, because this is a woman who lived in a society where women were defined in a certain way, to be passive, to have children, to almost be possessions, and of course did not learn how to write, but yet she never really believed in any of that. She stayed true to her own course, even as a little child, to be more. And
Yeah. And it seems like a difficult thing to have done. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's an easy path for her to take. She doesn't, it's so interesting that you do these pilgrimages in France, because the frame narrative of the story is that an old woman in France, a man, Lucas, who I based on the gospel writer Lucas, goes to find Mary Magdalene to finally ask for her side of the story. And she, of course, is in exile in France, where this folklore is deeply rooted, Magdalene folklore. And so the idea is that she's not in Egypt, she's not in her homeland of Judea, she's in France. And what is it like to stick to your guns and to really stand up for what you believe in, and then end up way far away from your family and from your kin? What does that feel like? So that sorrow of exile is really an important theme, I think, to me.
yes, and as Magdalene experienced in her childhood, it was like the symbol that I learned in France for Mary Magdalene is the tower. And
Yeah.
of course, she as a child, and I'm not going to reveal too much detail of the book because it's such a wonderful journey, but she would be out in this particular tower or on top of her roof, looking at the stars, saying prayers, meditating, and connecting to something she really did not intellectually understand, but she kind of knew she had to do it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, and I'm sure as a Magdalene, as a maghead, as you said, which I love that term, I'm sure you know about this, but perhaps our listeners don't, which is there's been a modern erasure, conscious mistranslation of Magdalene as representing a place. But Magdalene comes from Migdal Inn, which means the tower. And
Hmm.
there were no places on any maps, be they Jewish, be they Roman, until 200 years after Christ, where even anything is even called Migdal. I like to say to people that it would be equivalent to calling a town building or house, and that it would make that we forget that the Aramaic of the time period, because everything has been mistranslated, it's been put through a game of telephone, we forget about the context of what would have made sense. What makes much more sense is that we know from the canonical gospels, from apocryphal stories, that Jesus gave people nicknames. He called the Zebedee brothers the Thunder Brothers. He called Shimon, Simon, Peter, Rock.
Hmm.
That he loved that, and honestly, we have Miriam Magdalene, Miriam the Tower. So what's much more interesting to me is to think about what that nickname might have meant. Does it have scriptural tradition? The Tower of the Flock? What does it mean? Does it mean the tower that sees over people? Is it someone intimidating? Is it a name that denotes intimacy? And so for me, the tower is a really interesting way of looking at the Magdalene as being nicknamed by the character of Jesus, and then to reclaim that name. I mean, one thing I was interested in is a lot of theologians, historical scholars that I love have oftentimes been incredibly rigorous with their scholarship until they come to that name. And I always have to think that it's not laziness, it's a conscious erasure. That they say that there's a place called Magdala, but Magdala wasn't a place until the Jews had been exiled from Galilee and
Wow.
Judea, and until Romanized peoples had come over and taken over and renamed everything well after the sack of Jerusalem and well after the collapse of that entire ecosystem. It
Mm,
wasn't a place. She couldn't have been
wow.
to Magdala because it wasn't actually in existence. Yeah.
Well, I admire your knowledge of history and the details of all of what that is. And I know your mom and dad. I know your mama and dada. They've been on the
Yeah,
show, and they're writers, and
they
they've written
are.
really great books. But you seem to embody so much of that, this great intellectual pursuit. And at the same time, when I read your story and I read some of the real gem of some of this book is your descriptions and
Mm,
how it feels to embody a certain feeling inside of you, which Mary or Miriam in the book feels very deeply. And
yeah.
this really kind of bleeds over into intuition that you can feel and describe stuff so deeply.
Thank,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like this guy I was interviewing yesterday, Peter Craig. He says, "I'm not intuitive at all. I'm an empiricist. I'm practical," uh, and yet he, has all of these workings with angels, and when I'm around him, I get really bleary eyed because it's so powerful. I can hardly concentrate. Uh, so maybe you're in that boat that the intuition is so ingrained in you, you don't even realize it's happening.
Well, I have a feeling, which is we have this idea of intuition or psychism or channeling as being supernatural, but I
Hmm.
actually think it's profoundly natural. I think we have
Indeed.
a very narrow epistemological frame. Epistemology meaning ways of knowing that
Yes.
is relatively recent, born out of white Eurocentric Enlightenment paradigms. And the truth is that the world over, people have been smelling, tasting, feeling, reading leaf patterns, watching the stars, tracking their own body cycles and ways of knowing that are much bigger and wider and more fertile than the very narrow empiricist lens we abide by now. And so for me, intuition is not supernatural. It's not miraculous, it's embodied. It's the fact that my
Mhm.
senses evolved over a long time in concert with an environment. That my hand is this shape because it fit into an ecological niche. It started as a mistake and became an adaptation. And so my body is exquisitely keyed to an ecological dialogue and to reading weather systems, to smelling things, knowing that certain weather is coming. And for me, that's really my spirituality, is entering back into that sensual embodied dialogue whereby I am being used as a mouthpiece for a more than human music. One of my favorite parts of scripture is the Song of Songs. And I oftentimes say it's in ecology. It's not a text. You don't know who the speaker is. Is it the woman, the lover, the brothers, the foxes? There's smells, there's touch, there's movement and music. It's overabundant, it's entangled, it
Mhm.
explodes the idea of the atomized self that we work so hard
Yeah.
on containing. And so for me, what seems so sad about the gospel, as it's been translated, mistranslated, ossified, broken down, is that Jesus seems like a person who loved to use nature metaphors. He lived most of the time outside. He encouraged mutual aid, cooking, dirtiness. telling stories that made people interrupt you, taste and smell. He seems to be very much, he called himself the bridegroom more than he did the son of God. The bridegroom, which any, normal Jewish person at that time period would have known referred to the Song of Songs, this sensual, erotic, divine. And
Yes.
so for me, the most important thing about writing this book was, yes, I wanted it. I love historical fiction that's densely researched. And some Magdalene literature upsets me because it's not well researched. It erases the Jewishness of these people. It erases the complex political machinations, the textures, the foods. And I love having that detail. But the most important thing for me was, if the Gospels are disembodied and I was going to offer a different story, I wanted it to be something you could taste and eat and smell, that you could enter into with your animal body. So I really tried to do that.
And really, and when you describe that, I keep thinking, and I promised myself I wouldn't reveal too much about this book, but the scenes where they are with Saint John, or by the river,
Yochanan, yeah.
Yakiman, um, and you describe the community there, and this playful and this kind of this wild enthusiasm about the scripture that both men embodied, and like Yakiman was kind of the old school, and this up and coming guy named Yeshua was interesting and exciting. But when you talk about all the people, I kept thinking of Burning Man.
Right? Yeah.
And this inventiveness is like, we're beyond every boundary that we've known. And we're, of course, out in the wild in this nature where we're safe, and yet anything can happen.
Yeah.
It's just a wonderful feeling when you write about that, that the reader can journey into that place and feel all of that sensuality.
Thanks. I mean, it was so helpful. So I went to Bard College and I got briefly the honor of studying under Bruce Chilton, very briefly, but I've really benefited from his work and his lectures. He was part of the Jesus Seminar. I'm sure you're familiar with his work.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
his research into John the Baptist's movement and what it might have actually been like was so formative in me thinking about that, which is, it was like, there's a reason why people want to convert to your group. It's not because it's the word of God, it's because it's sexy and fun. And because times are really hard, the Romans are oppressing you, they've stolen your land, and this is a different option, and it seems better. And so it's important to represent that group as being compelling, as something you'd actually want
Yeah.
to join.
And that's so funny, because when I talk to people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that have a different outlook about what work and play is, it really matches up with like, well, I'm just kind of, tired of the way the system is running right now, and
Mhm.
I'm going to do something totally different. And I don't have all the answers with this, which I think Mary Magdalene is why people are so attracted to her.
Yeah,
She stood alone.
yeah,
And you described that so well in her childhood as the girl that was on the tower communing with the stars. Her sister thinks she's weird. Her brother, she's way beyond her brother. Somehow she has this huge intellect that she can memorize things and never forget them, a photographic memory, so to speak. And she also is out there, maybe in this communion with extraterrestrials that she doesn't even know is happening, but things are happening. And you keep giving these little clues and insights, like the communion with the leopards, that
yeah.
they approach her and pet her. And that is a great symbol of her vileness.
Well, it's interesting. I growing up had very big encounters with animals, and
Mm,
and of course, I had parents who were really interested in the history of religion and creating interfaith communities. And so definitely grew up around theologians, rabbis, priests, eco-anarchists, leaders, spiritual teachers. And yet, for me, the biggest teachings always came from non-human teachers. They came
Hmm.
from encounters with mountain lions, with rattlesnakes, with vultures, with eagles. And so I created Miriam's own experiences. I did draw from the big cats, the snakes, and the birds most associated in the Mediterranean with the goddess. So I did want to associate her within a kind of constellation of images that make sense. That the
Yes.
goddess was always seen flanked by lions. We have Inanna, Astarte, by leopards, by snakes, by doves. So I did consciously use symbols that to the deeper reader and researcher of goddess traditions, they would prick up. But I was drawing on my own life, which is it was these encounters with otherness, with other types of intelligence that changed me, that directed me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and one of the scenes where she's a witness, and this is right in the beginning of the book, of a woman who's being stoned to death because she's supposed to be a prostitute, and and it was probably just a frustrated husband that projected this on her and created the lie, and Mary Magdalene, the little girl, comes and intervenes between this beaten woman and the men before she's killed, and the vultures come in, and the vultures freak out the men and they all run away, but they came in kind of like our attack squadron, so to speak. And it was just interesting. It's just this great message that if you really stay true to yourself, spirit, a higher power, some sort of source is going to come to your assistance.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the realizations that Miriam has over time is that she has devoted herself to an ecological divine that is not necessarily on the side of humans. Not against humans, but they're not the main character. And I think
Yeah,
that is a tension in her. She loves human beings. She is married to kin to human beings. And the divine that she's in dialogue with says, yeah, you guys are okay, but something bigger is going on. And that
yeah,
can create real tension, I think, in her.
it really is. And maybe the whole message of Mary Magdalene and Jesus really wasn't made for the 2000 years that we've just experienced,
Yeah.
the age of man-made law, Pisces, but it's the age that is coming now because
Huh.
Jesus is very
Yeah.
heart-centered. But
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene is very second chakra centered. She is like
Interesting.
very much in her being of holding this energy for it to come through, and it always comes through when she needs it.
Yeah.
Like when she did her first healing. She
Something I've been thinking about with her is so even in the iconography and the story of the Gospels, she's there at the tomb. She's the anointer. She's there at the cross. That when the disciples have fled, even the Roman writers who are definitely trying to get rid of these other women can't ignore the fact that she's there at the cross, she's there at the tomb. She's there at moments of transition, limbo. Think of
Yeah,
her as being a death midwife. She's there to show us how to die, how to transition, how to move through experiences that are incredibly difficult. And something I have been thinking about is we're at this critical moment in humanity with massive extinctions that we've caused. So we're inside this massive moment of death. And she's shown up to say, I know how to do this. I know how to midwife you through this incredibly painful birth canal.
and intellectually, I don't know how to do it, but I'll
Yeah.
know that all of it will come because in my being, I understand this. And
Yeah.
she has developed that being. And you could say, oh, well, they both have been divinely guided and divinely uh, conceived to have this karma. But to me, you still have to do the lessons throughout your life to become and
Right.
actualize what that is. The seed may be there, the potential, but you still have to live this. And so much about this theme of the book is listening within,
Yeah.
and Miriam really listening, and Yeshua in his own way listening, and
Yeah.
he being the big so-called rock star doing all of these incredible things. Miriam could have done all of those things too and decided not to.
Yeah. She moves slower. I think a lot about how the difference between them is the difference in speeds. That he is a burning bonfire, and bonfires burn up really quickly, and she burns steady and slow. At a certain point in the book, she bemoans the fact that she's not as quote unquote powerful as him, that she doesn't have like the ability to do what he does. I don't
Uh-huh.
want to spoil it. It happens towards the end, but
Yes, let's not spoil it. And
yeah.
and and this is a great time to take a little bit of a break because we have Matt asking the question. Sophie sounds very intelligent. Duh, yes. I don't mean to put you down, Matt. What's that book called? The book is called
The Madonna Secret.
The Madonna Secret right here. And also, I just wanted to say that you are on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Network. And this show is called Becoming Quantum Conscious. And I'm Bart Sharp. We have Sophie Strand here. And not only can you see us on the regular radio out in New Orleans, but also on internet, on the UPRN website, on Roku. You can watch us, and Sophie's definitely more prettier than I am. Though I do have my Mary Magdalene red shirt on
Yeah, it's a
today.
nice red.
Yeah. It's just this is Magdalene for me. And also we're on YouTube and Roku. I said that before. Facebook, Spreaker, and other platforms. So we welcome everybody. I just wanted to read a quote from this because you're talking about death. And one of the great things about this book is all the descriptions. I keep thinking of Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath and the way he describes situations that you felt like you could feel the situation and feel what people felt. And that's what he wanted to bring the reader into in that great book, one of the greatest books in American history, in my opinion. So this is it. This is about death. Weep, mourn. But know this, these ancestors told me birth is the closest thing to death, and death is the closest thing to birth. Women have known this secret for thousands of years. Long ago, your people burned their dead in the floors of their homes. They slept pressed against the bones of their last children. They knew that they were truly not lost. The dead are but just seeds waiting to grow again. I mean, that's just so riveting. You just feel what that is. Of course, your mom, Perdita Finn, has just wrote a book about
Yeah.
summoning the dead and having the dead come into your life and help you, called Take Back the Magic. So I know, like mama, like daughter type of thing. Um, you know, and this is about fever because she was very sick at one time in the book. She goes, and then she was gone, meaning the fever, leaving me with a fever so complete my very skin felt it would burst and peel back from my bone. Like, wow. Pretty intense. Can you just how do you come to such great descriptions?
Well, that's very kind. I think that it's a compost heap of different things. One is that I read all the time. And I oftentimes say that the best way to think about writing and to feel into it is not to think about it, but to intuitively feel what writing feels like. And you do that by learning what you like to read. I read books. I've read so many books and really felt in my body what descriptions work, what descriptions change me. So I think when I sit down to write, I'm carrying all of these books in me and all of these ideas. I also think that I was born as the child of writers who taught me to think about life as poetry, to always be creating poetry on my fingers, counting it as haiku syllables. My dad is a haiku poet. So it's all of those things coming together. But one is also, and I think the third is the most important, which is I've had some very difficult experiences in my life that I needed to scaffold in language. The only way to keep alive, to keep surviving, was to find a way to contain and alchemize and change those experiences with language. And
Mm,
I think that that is what whenever I come to a story, I think about it as a mode of survival. How can I take experiences that are so big, that are so hard, and put skin on them, give them a skeleton so that they keep us moving?
wow. And that's a great way to deal with fear in general is
Yeah.
to really look it straight in the eye and describe it and know it clearly for exactly what it is. And then when you embody it again and accept it as what you have described it, it doesn't have nearly the load because you're no longer afraid of it or you're no longer trying to push it away from you. You realize that it's a part of you. And
Yeah.
and so it just really sounds like you're doing that same thing. I just wanted to ask you another question. And then I kind of want to get into some of the observations of Mary that I haven't really, or Miriam, that maybe we can talk about.
Yeah.
But this is kind of a simple one. What kind of message would you like your reader to walk away with when they read this book?
Oh, well, one is that there are so many myths, stories, paradigms right now that hold within them silenced voices. And I invite other people to interrogate the religions, the stories, the cultures they were raised within, and look for the missing voices. Do you have an art form? Do you have music? Do you have your own writing? Can you bring these voices back to life? Um, but the other one is that, it's at the very end, she says, don't, this is not really spoiling it, but she's illiterate. She can't write. And she says the most important thing is not writing this story down. It's keeping storytelling alive in breath, boats of breath that tie bodies to
Mm,
other bodies. So I think the thing I want to keep alive is that we need to keep telling stories that they adapt to changing climatological and social circumstances. That every time we think we know a story, it's worth possibly retelling.
mm. Yeah, so maybe people can make their own story
Yeah,
in
tell your
relation
own Magdalene story.
to Magdalene, which
Yeah,
I think many people want to do, and
exactly.
maybe they don't have the courage with that to have that. Uh, I go to this mountain in France called Peche Cardew, and I channel. And when I go to this mountain or at a certain place in the base, it's really easy to channel Magdalene. And one day she said, "Well, do you want to know what my energetic body is like?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Well, you know what the solar plexus is about, the God within, and the second chakra is about your being, the way you hold power and your sexuality and your intuition and your creativity and those things, how you walk with that and your anger." And but she showed me that the chakra in between was the stomach, and it held the energy of feeling everybody else's energy and not reacting to it.
Huh.
And when you can live in that state where you have no reaction, but just total allowance for everything and everyone around you. And as she said, when I was in France, I was around danger all the time, and they would kill me, and they killed people I loved, and yet I had to love them. I had to keep it at a higher place, even they were dangerous. so I could be this clear channel. And when that happened, then the heart changed into the color of red that we commonly associate with Mary Magdalene, which is kind of like this, but it's a little bit
Mm.
darker. And to me, it's a very passionate and yet caring, nurturing love that
Mm.
color is all about.
So interesting that you bring up the stomach. I don't know a lot about chakras, but I have a genetic illness, and one of my main complaints, one of my most serious complaints is, gastric ailments and stomach. I
Hmm.
can't digest food. And so it's so interesting to think about that as being a place that symbolically, energetically represents this perhaps this invitation to digest resentment and anger.
But
Um,
also digest everybody's anger around the world and
yeah.
around everything, because some people are that energetically big, and they're very powerful people when they are energetically as big as the state of New York or the northeast region of America. But also they are connected to millions of people, and they take on their energies, and therefore the body has troubles taking that on. Uh, it's a blessing, and it's also a challenge to do that. Um, just food for thought. And somebody like Jesus or Mary Magdalene, their energetic being was huge. They were taking this on, and maybe that's why they were in nature so much, because there's fewer people out in nature. You're isolated, and you can start to have that peace inside of you.
Yeah, I mean, also just practically, the Romans controlled all the cities. So,
Yeah,
one of the best ways to create a kind of countercultural movement was to leave civilization, to leave the city.
yeah.
Um, and I think that right now, I'm not anti-city at all, but I do think that, there's a certain we have so much human noise in the city and so little
Mm,
ability to get quiet enough to hear the other voices. And
yeah.
I think that they invite us, the Magdalene and Jesus at the river in Galilee, which would have been much closer to the ecology of Provence, we now know at that time period. It invites us to sit with the birds, the foxes, the weeds, the greens, and say, "Do you have better advice on how to manage this?" I've gone to all my human teachers, and they're pretty worried. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And when you look at the Jewish culture at that time, they were so stuck in their head with the scriptures,
Well,
and
I will counter that.
it created a maze of consciousness. They were kind of lost in the maze of trying to find out the right answers, and both Miriam and Yeshua went straight to it.
I will counter that and say, because
Okay.
I do always, there's always a strong urge to homogenize the Judaism of the time period. But there was Galilean Judaism. There were about like 20 different intersecting sects. So you have like Jerusalem Jews who are, of course, very scholarly, but the type of Judaism that Jesus comes out of is very animistic, very oral, very interesting, and really interested in oral storytelling and play, kind of like wandering Zen masters, at a certain time period. So I
Yeah.
think it's always important to say that it's not really these like people squabbling over scripture. He comes out of this almost magical tradition of Northern Judaism, which is of a very different flavor. And I think that's for me a really interesting conundrum, which is he takes this very ecological, animistic Judaism of the North down to Jerusalem. And of course he's mistranslated. He's coming up against just a different type of Judaism, and they agree about some things, but they're experiencing empire in different ways, and they're
So,
surviving it in different
so
ways.
one question, I want you to continue with
Yeah.
this. Is that background a scene?
No, no. I mean, I think it's so interesting. Essenes are I'm thinking about peasant agricultural folk practices. The
Wow.
Judaism of the real people, not the like. As I do think it's quite likely that Jesus studied with lots of different teachers. We think of spiritual seekers that go to different communities. He obviously landed with John the Baptist, but did he spend time with the Essenes? Perhaps. But I'm thinking of what is the type of Judaism he would have been raised in as a child? What were the
Mm,
stories? What were the beliefs that would have permeated his childhood? because those things, that's a strong sedimented layer. And
Yeah.
so I was really interested in the folk practices, that we have back formed an idea of Judaism that is strongly tainted by kind of Christian anti-Semitism. And it's important to go back and see that it represented an ecosystem of different practices.
Wow, interesting. And the way you describe him physically,
Yeah.
he sounds like a wild man. He
Yeah.
sounds a little bit crude and kind of like knocked around, like everything isn't in place, like a super handsome guy. And at the same time, he's very attractive, very charismatic, and people are naturally drawn to him. So he has that rugged
Well,
look about him.
yeah, I think a lot about is, so he's preaching to Galileans who have been through some of the worst imperial violence. So they come from an epigenetic history of empires, dislocation, murder, genocide, oppression. So they have that in their ancestry. But then on a day-to-day basis, they've had their land stolen by the Romans. They don't have enough money to pay their taxes or feed their family. The land that they considered them to be sacred has been stolen. And every couple of weeks, the Romans come and rape someone and kill everyone. Their revolts, they all fail. People are often murdered, families, children. So these are hard people. These are people who are like, you know, prophets come and go. They usually fail. Life is really hard, hard. And these are people who it's hard to get their attention. It would be hard.
Mm,
And I think, who's the kind of person who could come into that community of hardworking day laborers who have seen all of their hopes squashed again and again and get their attention? I'm thinking it's a person who's like them, who's
mhm.
incredibly physically charismatic, who knows how to engage people with his whole body.
Yeah, and it would be natural to think that, oh, he's going to lead the revolution because he's powerful. Because
Yeah,
as we start to talk about people in modern day, or a lot of people, they have this thing that God will save all my problems if
yeah,
I'm faithful to God, which means I'm faithful to religion. And to me, that's kind of isn't exactly correct. God guides you and is a voice that's silent. And
mm,
much like Mary Magdalene, she said, I put myself in a situation and I open up the energy in my body to receive something higher, and I kind of get out of the way and let it happen.
yeah. How
And
do we
it's,
let ourselves be borrowed? That's such
yeah,
an interesting question.
which is a real difference between what spirituality is and what the Jews needed to live a better life,
Yeah, yeah.
because there wasn't a great answer to that better life thing for those people at that time.
No, and in fact, I think one of the main impulses is, how do I write this as a tragedy and not a miracle story? Because
Yeah.
the story ends with Jerusalem burned, with most of the main characters dead. You know, we from the remove and the safety of different cultures of empire, we can view this as a miracle story, but for the people involved, it would feel like the end of the world. And
It
so I did
is.
want to honor the fact that this is a story of apocalypse, of a personal apocalypse. Um,
And
yeah,
some places survive and still are, for example, Jerusalem,
yeah,
regardless of how the people live and die.
yeah,
They persevere. When I've been in Ireland before, you talk to the people, and it's kind of the same thing. They've been taken over, and people have bought their land, or they've taken it away from them, and et cetera, as the history goes on. But the Irish people and their connection with the land remain. And it's almost like, well, I may not own that land now, but in a couple of generations, it'll come Irish owned by my, grandchildren. You kind of have that mindset. And this is kind of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has many changes because it's kind of in the center of the world energetically in some respects.
maybe
Uh,
it's a place that has attracted bloodshed, and where children of many different beliefs have died. I mean, I I've walked those roads. I got sick when I actually went to Israel to visit family for the first time.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me to think about,
And it's
like,
also the
yeah,
place of beautiful consciousness
yeah,
where
yeah, which,
things prosper and thrive
yeah,
and grow and develop in my own sense. I've never
yeah,
been
oh,
there, but as a psychic, I travel all over the world, and I'm always led to the power of that place.
yeah.
And
I mean, I've been there, I spent time there, and I agree. But I also think that what I always want to gift to people is Miriam was responding to the place where she was born, the place where she knew the birds. She ate the food that was grown in the dirt. And if she's teaching us anything, it's not to fetishize somewhere else, but it's to root down to where we are. Like, where is our Jerusalem here? Like, for me, what I think about is I read Jesus's parables, and then I look outside my window right now to the Hudson Valley and say, what parables are here? What do I
mm,
have to notice? How do I come home to the patch of dirt below my feet? And so
yes,
for me, the really important thing is to plant this story back in the ground in Jerusalem and Galilee and the
and,
Jordan River, but then
and
to come home to where I am.
and to plant yourself into
Yeah,
the earth of your community.
yeah,
Uh, Maybe even plant trees or plant things that grow big and beautiful things
yeah,
that everyone can benefit from.
yeah. Free food. I mean, I think if Jesus has any teaching, it's share food. Share food with everyone. And it's such a simple thing to do. Can
Yeah,
we support local farmers? Can we start gardens of our own? Can we can we protect wild plants, that we can eat?
but
Um,
also that would be sharing knowledge and
yeah,
having the courage and bravery,
yeah.
like yourself, to write a book like this. This book is 598 pages, folks.
Yeah.
It is thick, and it's it takes a while to read it because you have to think about a lot of the concepts in it. It's not something that you're just flipping through and being entertained. It
Mm,
like perplexes you to think and to feel and to get all of those things in. So this is part of what grows from the soil through your feet into your hands, and then onto a computer to type it all out.
I know. Um, yeah, it was 1,000 pages initially, and then
Oh
I
my
edited
God.
it. So I was like, "That's way too long." But yeah, still very long.
Yeah, but historical fictional novels in
Yeah,
general are 400 to 600, 700 pages.
yeah. I wanted to create
So
an epic. I wanted it to feel like a full meal. Yeah.
yes, it is an epic because you really tell the story of the times, and that's a wonderful thing. I don't think, from what I've learned from this book and from your conversation, of how much the Jewish people suffered every day, and how they
Yeah.
have held that probably maybe up
Yeah.
to this day.
Yeah, we're
Uh,
seeing a lot of collective. I mean, I think the one thing I'll say about that story is it's not just one people who are suffering under empire in that story, it's everybody. And everybody, you see men hurting women, but those men in turn are being hurt by empire. That,
yeah,
the main, the villain of the story is not a person. It's the idea that we can control other people and their land and tell them where they can go and can't go. Um,
the beginning of man-made law.
yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and also before, what I always thought of John the Baptist as I studied, like the Knights Templar.
Uh-huh.
The two people that they secretly worshipped and admired was John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, and that was kind of in that secret premise
Yeah.
there with that. But John the Baptist is that doorway to David, teachings
Yeah.
of Solomon, the magic that Anna, who is the grandmother of Jesus, and
Yeah.
that's a great book, Anna, grandmother of Jesus, that all of them held this old magic to impart. And the thing with John the Baptist is kind of like he's the last semblance of it, but he always seems to be kind of dried up and rigid. Like
Well, I have my own feelings about. I've been very inspired by the historical work of John Dominic Crossan, just
mhm,
writing about the differences in what John was teaching with Jesus. And John was actually much more, you know, traditional in his
mm,
views. He was really only heretical and only killed because he opposed Herod, but Herod was actually more heretical when it came to traditional Judaism. So it's really interesting things when you
yeah.
go back to the nitty-gritty. Yeah. So he was actually teaching something that was pretty standard.
Yeah, and I guess it just had to be, in
Yeah.
general speaking. Now
Yeah.
we got about 5 more minutes,
Yeah.
and I didn't say this, but I wanted to say it now. If you have a question for Sophie, uh, you better get on your computer and type it out, and we'd be happy to field that. Um, you know, I just love it, and this is so much about women now, of this fierceness to express, but also this journey of knowing what's in your gut, knowing who you are, knowing something of like that connection of a greater wisdom, and to stand up for that, and like the Dalai Lama says, Western women will change and heal the world. And it's kind of like that's a lot what you're describing is a person whose accomplishments and wisdom transcend all of time.
And she was not a Western woman.
No, she wasn't, but she is
Yeah, I
what
know.
Western women can look for, and that's what
Yeah.
they can learn in this book is like
Yeah.
a story like that.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, I just hope that we can, this story was my emergency. I thought to myself, what story would I want to heal? Would I want to heal in myself? Would I want to pour my soul into before I died? If I had a limited amount of time, and given my health at that time period, it looked like I did. I thought this is the story that could keep me alive, or I would definitely want to write before I die. And so I
Mm.
always want to just offer to people and to women, to anyone, what story is your emergency? That we're living in times that are awful dire. We shouldn't waste time on stories that don't feel urgent. So, yeah,
Oh, wow, what a beautiful thought.
yeah.
And we're coming down to the last couple of minutes, so I'm going to say my parting shots, but I want you to think about this question. What would you or Mary Magdalene or one of the two give to people right now as a message, like advice or higher guidance, so to speak, or higher advice, excuse me? And while you think about that, I will say that this is Becoming Quantum Conscious. And my name is Bart Sharp. And next week, we have Peter Craig with the title Transformational Healing of the Higher Realms of God. This is a man who does a lot of healing work in the higher realms and sees a world consciousness, how it works and how it's dysfunctional by examining it from the higher realms. So this will be a really amazing show. I've pre-recorded it, so I already know it's an amazing show. And you are on United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network out of New Orleans, Louisiana. And we are seen on Roku, Facebook, YouTube, and other platforms all around the world. So I hope you enjoy us next week. And we have Sophie Strand here with her book, The Madonna Secret. And we never did cover well, I kind of know what the secret is. And if you read the book, you will know what the secret is. So we'll leave that secret. So, Sophie, what advice do you give? What would Mary Magdalene say, as they say? WWMMD.
What would Mary Magdalene say? Well, I think at the heart of my book is not a book about theology. It's not a book about telling you what to do. It's a book, it's a love story. And that's what I'm really interested in, are love stories. And Miriam follows what she loves, and for better or for worse. And I oftentimes think that in the natural world, beings follow their desire, their appetites, their tastes, their love, their attraction. And the bee goes into the flower, attracted by its color, attracted by its nectar, and incidentally pollinates so many other beings, incidentally weaves itself into mutual interdependence. And so I say to people, follow what you love. Follow the animals, the beings, the stories, the inquiries that you just can't stop thinking about, and trust that it will pull you into your ecological niche. It will pull you back into that ecological dialogue.
Wow. Very profound.
Thank you so much, Bart. This has been such a pleasure.
Yes, it is. And we want to thank everybody for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week. And thank you so much again, Sophie Strand of the Madonna Secret. And we'll see you all next